warm welcome to ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with ET CFO. I'm your host Divina Lasson, and on this series, we're thrilled to bring you conversations with India's leading CFOs to help us get unique insights into the journey of the modern CFO. Now, in an ever-evolving world, businesses face a dynamic landscape that's filled with unprecedented challenges and opportunities. The ability to foresee and adapt to these potential future threats is a critical skill for long-term success. So in this episode, we're here to discuss preparing for the future, building an effective scenario planning. To help us deep dive into this and much more are esteemed panelists Rashmi Mohanty, CFO, SBI Cards and Payment Services, and Dev Tripathi, CFO, Philips India. So thank you so much, Rashmi Dev, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the show. We're excited to talk about scenario planning, right? And why this is so integral when it comes to preparing for the future in the face of all the various challenges, macroeconomic and global issues that we're facing. So let's deep dive a little bit into it. Rashmi, maybe you can help with the context setting to start with, and what, in your opinion, constitutes of scenario planning in the first place? What would be sort of the essential pillars that you would say are necessary to look at when thinking of scenario planning?
So maybe I'll just add a comment to what you said earlier, that why is it important? And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is the fact that you can let the company work and move on a BAU basis, right? But if you do want that one level up or two level up, or you want to change the way things are, that is one reason why you would want to do some kind of a scenario planning.
Yes.
The second reason could be you could see trends which can help you get that flip, and therefore you would want to see as to how does those trends, if you were to change your business model in order to be able to capture those trends perfectly, how does it work out for you, right? Competition is another reason as to why you would want to do scenario planning, that if you can see your peers do things a little differently, and you've got a certain way you're doing your business. If you were to change the way you were doing business, the way your peers were doing it or your competition was doing it, how does it impact, and what is it that you have to do to be able to go past them, for example? And of course, I think COVID's kind of exposed us all to an environment and to a situation where if you've not planned, and you saw that, I know, for example, in my company itself, when the first lockdown was announced, everybody just got together, obviously virtually, not across the desk, but to plan out and say, what if this continues for 10 days? What if this continues for 30 days? Or what if it continues for 6 months? How will the business be impacted? So I think that was scenario planning on the go. Every day you were changing your assumptions, you were changing things. And I guess from there comes the whole thing about what is it that you require for successful scenario planning. I think first and foremost would be for you to be aware of what's happening across the industry, in terms of the external factors as a big topic, in terms of what your peers are doing, and as in your competition is doing. For example, what's happening on the regulatory side. In almost all companies that I was just trying to think about as I was on my way here, is there any company which is not impacted by the changing consumer behavior, right? So what is the consumer preference? And that will be determined a lot by, for example, demographics. And I won't get into the details of it, but there is this whole external environment that's changing around you. It's not static. Every day you have something or the other happen which comes and impacts your business. Or you may not feel that impact immediately, but if you're not able to assess the impact of that change on your business 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, your business can get completely wiped out. So there is this whole external factor which you need to know. And before you get into numbers, I think the key thing is to first just understand qualitatively as to what those factors are and what is the impact that they can have. The second important step towards scenario planning would be your own internal business model. You need to have a very clear understanding of how do you run your business, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And I have this really very pet line that I tell all my bankers and my investors whenever I speak with them, is that you need to know the levers that the organization has. Yes. And what are those levers and how can you move those levers to your advantage. Okay, so that understanding of your own internal business model, is very important. And I think the third very important thing, and I won't get into the outcome of the scenario planning, but in terms of the inputs, is being able to then pick the right kind of assumptions. Now, again, on the assumptions, it's not that when you're putting your assumptions, you can have a laundry list and say, let me assume X is equal to this, Y is equal to this, Z is equal to this, A is equal to this, and have a laundry list of about 20 odd things that you're going to be testing your model on. But you should be able to pick those 4 or 5 key parameters, or as I call levers, to be able to assume that if this there's a change in lever A, what happens? Okay. And the fourth very important thing is the interdependencies. I think some of us sometimes in the speed to be able to get the outcome and to be able to know, hey, look, what's going to happen if I change this thing, miss out on the interdependencies, right? So for example, I'll give you an example, very simple example. You had COVID hit the entire country. You had people who lost their jobs, inflation, unemployment, blah, blah, blah. And you had the FMCGs companies who actually started giving out things in smaller sachets or smaller packets. Now, that obviously means that earlier you were giving, let's say, 10 biscuits in one package. Now you're giving 5 in one. There is a cost of packaging that has changed. Yeah. There's a cost of distribution that has changed. Yeah. Now, one thought could have been, hey, look, it's easier for me to sell a package, just a smaller packet instead of a bigger packet. Let's just go do it. But unless you understand the interdependencies across the entire value chain, your assumptions, your scenario plan will completely go for a toss.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for laying that out. Deep, let's come to you. Similar point, just to start with, what according to you are the essential elements when it comes to scenario planning? Yeah. Anything you'd like to add to Rashmi?
Yeah, I think Rashmi is nicely covered. So normally the scenario planning comes under the strategic planning process of any organization. So that's the overarching umbrella under which it works. There are multiple elements, but if you ask me top 3 elements, because why it is so important, scenario planning, is you are keeping an organization future ready. Yeah. Future ready for all uncertainties, yes. Okay, which we don't know today exactly. So the 3 key elements, if you'll ask me, which normally I follow, is one is that is definitely the objective and the scope. The second can be the stakeholders, and the third is the key drivers. Okay, now coming to each of them. So if you'll see that the objective and scope, you need to start the scenario planning keeping an end in your mind. Okay, what you want to achieve from a scenario planning. So which are the uncertainties which you foresee that you want to address at the end of the scenario building. Okay. Now coming to the stakeholder side, the stakeholders contributes to a lot. When it happens, you have to take it in 2 axes. Okay. One is that, okay, it is external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. Okay. When you say internal stakeholders, they can be your employees. Okay. External stakeholders, they can be your partners, industry experts. To the other axis, if you'll see, you need to really choose your stakeholders who comes from experience, expertise, okay, so where they can contribute a lot to the wide range of scenarios, okay. Now moving to the third, the key drivers. So there can be drivers like financial drivers. These are the variables which can make scenarios to swing in an area. So you need to use those variables to see that how sensitive this scenario building is giving. And something we need to really watch out is the external factors also, that if there is a regulatory changes, what happens? There is macroeconomic changes, what happens? There is any sort of supply chain or something like a COVID, what happens? Okay, so these are the things which is like external factors you need to keep. While you focus on these 3 key elements, something we need to really watch out is that, okay, when you are preparing a scenario building, you need to have a very clear scope in mind, because you should not end up in a zone that you are trying to fix something which is beyond your influence. Yes. So you may come across the negative, the extremes, and you feel that, okay, no, it is out of your area of influence. Okay, so you have to avoid those extremes and focus somewhere in between in the middle, which you can influence. Okay. Also, you need to focus like what is the starting point, or what are the nudges which tells you that, okay, now some uncertainty has unfold. Okay. So these are the things which I feel that which, helps, key elements of scenario planning.
So, after understanding that there's such a wide range of factors, internal as well as external, that you must take into consideration for scenario planning, Rashmi, how do you determine sort of the range and scope of scenarios that get included in the first place when you're conducting such an exercise?
Let's take an example. Suppose if I'm trying to assess the change in interest rates on my business model, right? That's a very simple one to take. One, of course, you will go back and look at historically what has been the change. Okay, obviously there will be instances and there will be events in the historical data where there could be extremes. So, for example, you may see that the regulator has increased the rates by 500 basis points in a certain span of time. But typically, you'll be able to figure out there's a certain cycle in which the regulator kind of increases the rates and starts to drop the rates as well. So historical data definitely is one way to be able to determine what the range could be. The second could be in terms of getting experts to give you a view, which is where these ad hoc or one-off kind of events come in. So you have a COVID which comes in, the regulator and the government had to act swiftly in order to be able to order to help the economy. They took certain actions. Now what happens next? Which is where probably you've not seen such a scenario in the past, and therefore the expert opinions come in, and therefore they kind of look at, you can build all of those or their expert opinions as a range when you're looking at the range for those variables. I think the third thing also could be that how has, again, back to the competition, back to the peer set, the industry, what have they experienced, right? So for example, if it's cost escalation, right? How have they managed? So while of course you may see that the raw material or the input costs are going up, but is there a way to manage that? And therefore, is there a way to control the variables and therefore limit the range and not really let the range go out of scope, as they was earlier mentioning that the scope has to be defined very clearly. So those are three things at least that, whenever I've kind of sat down to look at the scenario planning, you would think about the ranges in that sense.
Okay, thank you. So, Dev, now after understanding how you sort of incorporate factors in the scope of your scenario planning exercise, taking it forward, how do you assess the feasibility or the impact of those scenarios?
Yeah. So I think, before you go to any scenario planning, or after, at least once you prepare a model, it is really essential that, okay, you need to test that, okay, whether the scenarios are working. It's exactly like, you develop an ERP systems, and if you don't do an UAT, okay, so when the rubber hits the road, you may come to know many new things,
yes,
many surprises.
Yes.
And that's why it is essential that, okay, you need to do a proof check whether this is working. So typically how do I follow is, there is a quantitative analysis which we do, and then there is a qualitative analysis, assessment which we do, and lastly we see that, okay, what are the outcomes from the scenario planning. Now coming to the a quantitative assessment analysis. So quantitative analysis is like, you need to feed, you have to create the financial models where you need to really see that, okay, if this scenario unfolds, how does it has an impact on your top line, your cost, your profitability?
Yes.
What's the impact of these scenarios on your working capital, whether you need a capital infusion, where you need to, how to mobilize your resources. Then if you go to the qualitative assessment, so there actually you need to see that, okay, I think Rashmi has also covered that, you need to have your customer behaviors, how the market dynamics are changing. Those things you need to really see that, okay, if this scenario unfolds, how these things will change. Yes. Okay. The last thing which I normally expect from a scenario building is, what's the outcome of a scenario building? Okay, when you built up a scenario model, then you should see that, okay, if the scenario building is giving me something which is an actionable item at the end of the day, because it's not something, it's not a science, purely science, it's an art also, but at the end of the day, it should be an actionable item which people should able to follow and execute it. So that then, because you're doing all this scenario to mitigate the risk. okay, or mitigate the uncertainties. So that's why I feel that, okay, this three will be, something which helps to really see how robust is your scenario building is.
That's a great point, actually. It's an art at the end of the day. So, Rashmi, say a similar point. What any tools or methods that you use to sort of validate the assumptions of your various scenarios?
See, if you've been in the industry and if you know your business model well, I would bring in the element of what I call as common sense and gut as well. There are some numbers when they come up, you know that there is something wrong, right. and I'm sure that Dev and I have sat through so many of our meetings internally where you have your analysts who bring in the data and you just look at the data and say, this isn't right. Like, this isn't right because you've understood the business model, you know the industry, you know the behavior of your competition, you know how the regulator's thinking about things. So I would always say, don't ignore that part. Okay, if you have that a little bit of a doubt that there is something amiss in what has come out, please go back and recheck your assumptions. That's the first and the foremost thing that I will do. The second one that I would repeat is what Dave said earlier. As long as there is no actionable coming out of your scenario planning and your model building, there is something wrong with it. Okay, if suppose you are aiming for a certain kind of an output and the output requires you to double the capacity in 6 months, not possible. Go back and retest as to what have you done wrong in your assumptions, what is it that you've looked at the data incorrectly. And the third is what I would call a bit more theoretical, which is that, for example, you have data from, again, your peers and your own data from the past, and you found a correlation with a particular, let's say, an economic indicator. It could be as simple a thing as inflation, it could be GDP growth, I don't know, whatever it is, right? You can do some kind of a back check as well. When you're looking at the data and you don't get that thing that there is something wrong, get an expert to come and take a look at it. And when I'm saying an expert, doesn't have to be somebody outside of your organization. It could be somebody within the organization. Get a different perspective. Do you think it's going to work? Get people, internal stakeholders. So if suppose something requires you to change the way you are operating in your factory, get your factory people to come in and take a look at those assumptions and say, does it make sense for you? Is it something which is doable, not doable? So I think there are a couple of ways that you would, and to me, this is the most important step. I think each and every step is important, but when you start looking at the assumptions, when you start back testing your assumptions is a very important thing, because if you don't get that right, if you don't get the variables right, and if you don't get the range for those variables, which is what I call together as assumptions right, the entire process is going to fail after that.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that insight. And actually, you made a very interesting point also about getting all the stakeholders involved. And Dave, maybe you can shed some light on this, on how do you approach that, getting various stakeholders involved when it comes to scenario planning, and how can you sort of make that process as efficient and effective as possible?
So, stakeholders is one of the key elements I mentioned in the beginning also. Stakeholders can be, in a scenario planning, there is two parts. Okay, one is that, okay, when you're planning a scenario, and the second part is that when you're executing a scenario, okay, whatever the outcomes you are starting executing. So in the first planning side, you need to see that, okay, whether you have all the thinking, think tanks really are part of this process. So you may go for your experience, expertise, and when you say experience and expertise, don't restrict them to only internal. Yeah. Okay, you can go external, and Rashmi also covered that one.
Yes.
You have industry experts, your vendor partners, your customer partners. You may have to involve them so that you get a wider range of options, and you can it will be really inclusive actually when you involve them. By involving those stakeholders, okay, you also get a benefit when it comes to the execution piece. So, I always refer to a saying that we all like children, but we love ours the most. So similarly, once we involve stakeholders at various levels, so when it comes to the execution stage, then there is a sense of ownership comes. It's my idea which I'm executing. Okay, so like she said that if there is a factory issue, bring the factory people together. Okay, there is a lot of collaboration which is required. Once you go to the execution piece, that's where this helps, when you bring the stakeholders together. Yeah. So stakeholders, I really feel that one of the most important element, and bringing them together, selecting them on time, and being an inclusive stakeholder ecosystem, that will be, I think, a boon for the scenario planning.
I'll add one thing to what Dave is saying, and I think that's a very important. I'm sure Dave will agree with me on that one. Is when you get the stakeholders in, make sure that you're able to filter out their biases.
Okay.
Because each one of them comes with their biases.
Right, yes.
We've done it like this for the last 10 years. Can't do it differently. Okay. I've seen it happen only in this manner. In my previous company, you people, I don't know what you are doing. Okay. So everybody comes in with their biases, and it's just so important for you to be, and look, you will never get it right. It's not that you'll be able to filter out the biases, which are just the perfect way of filtering out the biases. But you should have the ability to be able to filter out the biases and keep them aside. Because once the biases come in, it can completely ruin your entire planning process.
Yes. Good point there. So after taking care of all these factors, be it stakeholders, internal factors, external factors, and you finally have formulated your consensus through the scenarios, how do you sort of just really ensure that this is as plausible and realistic a scenario as possible?
Actually, let me just step back. The one thing that I tell people whenever we bring them on board to any change that we're bringing about in the organization is that don't start off by saying exactly what I said earlier. It can't be done. It has not been done. Okay? Find a way to get it done. Unless you think it's something which is completely out of range, out of scope, and is just not possible. I guess that's the first filter. That helps you filter out the extremes. Okay? Once you've filtered out the extremes on both ends, when you have something which is a doable, as I call it, doable, executable range, is when then you start thinking about as to which of these makes more sense for us. And which is where I guess as a finance person, our inputs are very important, because then we're able to play around with the levers to say, I've got a 6-month time frame. This is what is doable in the 6-month time frame. This is what I'm going to get out of it. I have a 12-month time frame. This is what's possible in the 12-month time frame. This is what I can get out of it. So it all, and how do you define the time frame will depend upon what are you solving for, as what Dave said earlier. What is your objective? Are you trying to better than a competition? Are you trying to overcome an external challenge? Are you trying to overcome an internal challenge? For example, the IT companies went through a different kind of a wave. They went and hired everybody and anybody at double the salary, and now you just see what's happening in that, right? So it's a challenge. It's an internal challenge as well. So it all depends on what is it that you're solving for, which will define the time frame. And then once you've done that exercise of weeding out the extremes, is when you sit down and say, what is it that I want to do, which is what makes it possible or plausible, so to say.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. And as a sort of final step, what does it take to ensure that all the insights you've gained from scenario planning finally actually get integrated into the overall business strategy?
Yeah, so there are two parts to this question, what you mentioned. In an organization, when there is a challenge, people come together, they do certain things, and as we move on, somewhere it becomes a past actually, it stops. So how to make it like a regular practice, that this is a continuous improvement plan. So if we'll say the two parts to it is that one side is the culture, and the second part is that how you enable. So here the role of the leaders is very important here, where the leaders needs to set the tone, saying that yes, they value that there is a scenario planning, and that's essential for the organization, and people who are working towards that one, that actually they should be acknowledged. The second, where you see a bottleneck now many times, is that the lack of coordination and collaboration among the various teams. So the leaders needs to enable that coordination and collaboration has to come up. So if there is a strategic planning team and there is a scenario planning team which are different, we need to make sure that they are cycles, the timing of their cycles actually matches. There's a very clear communication between these groups so that, okay, there is no such, miss happens, or there is no such overlapping which happens. Okay, so, and the collaboration, if it is not there, then people the team gets frustrated, saying that, okay, there is, and I think both of us have touched in the past that there is a lot of dependencies, interdependencies. So where all the functions needs to come together when it comes to the execution piece or sharing the intelligence and expertise.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you have to have a plan. You got to have, so in certain organizations, you will want the plan to be blessed by the board, for example. Okay, in certain organizations where there is a lot more entrepreneurial culture to which they was sitting to, you will have the leaders themselves trying to drive that change within the organization to solve for whatever that, whatever the objective is. But I think it's important to then put some timelines. In certain cases, put the actionables part of the KRAs, define timelines, have steercos who are able to then see as to what's happening, and that whatever you've planned, whatever you've come out with is not just left to the paper.
Correct. And many times now how we normally follow is that, okay, you create a daily management board. Okay, it should be in the, and who all are participants to those daily management board discussions. Okay, so it's a lean principle under which this is an amazing tool, very effective tool, where you see every day, you discuss how we are progressing. Okay, so that's how it works.
How do you ensure that this continues to be an ongoing and very dynamic part of your company's functioning moving forward, and it's not only a go-to solution when there is a crisis situation or you foresee something that's very clearly coming in the pipeline? So how do you really make it part of your company culture?
I would like to make a comment on that, saying that when Dave is saying that you have to bring the scenario planning and the strategy planning together, you can't keep doing it every 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Okay, it's a once in a time period kind of an exercise, because once you've aligned the two, you have to let the decisions you've taken to be executed and therefore the results to be seen. Depending on the time frame, as I said earlier, if it's 3 months, you have to let the 3 months go by and then see where we are, if it's 1 year. And usually when it is strategic, when it is linked to strategy, it can't just be a 3 months, 6 months, right? So it has to be a longer period. So one, it can't be a regular thing. What will become regular is measurement and monitoring. Okay, so that has to become regular, which is where the roles of leaders come in to make sure that people are on track, which is where, for example, sometimes you will see organizations have steercos. So you will have monthly steerco meetings for people to come and give an update, solve for issues that are, roadblocks for people. How do you help them? And that then needs to become a regular exercise or part of your an extended scenario planning plan in that sense.
And I go by what Rashmi said. The only thing which I would like to add is that don't ignore that there is a dynamic world outside.
Yes.
So while we are working on one scenario planning, maybe the competitive landscape, the market dynamics are also changing. So don't hesitate to make certain small course corrections to your planning so that it actually gives the desirable results.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a great journey you've taken us on when it comes to understanding all the ins and outs from beginning to end of scenario planning. So thank you so much, both of you, for your inputs. Before we wrap up, if I may suggest, we do a little fun rapid fire round. Rashmi, ladies first. First question, if you are not a CFO, what would you have been?
I would have been a teacher. And I'm a teacher in all other ways.
I can't, you cannot steal my answer. The same goes for me as well.
Okay, great. Well, that is very clear.
That was something that I have no doubts about.
Clear.
Actually, I think we have been taught so much that, okay, given a chance, we would like to be teacher.
Okay, fantastic. Your strongest skill in finance?
So let me put it this way. I'm not a CA. And I've learned it on the job. The ability to be able to understand and I will use the word rigid, and I hope all CAs forgive me for that, accounting policies.
Okay.
So that's something that I've learned on the job, and I'm quite proud of it, if you may say.
Good example.
So if you say I enjoy analyzing things, okay, be it historical trends, or I would like to see that, okay, how's the external factors.
Yeah.
Somebody compares the historical numbers with the external numbers.
Sure.
I love to see those things, those analysis.
Analysis. Great. All right. The most memorable moment you've had in your career?
Many. And honestly, there are just so
There's one
many.
that takes the cake.
I would say joining Vedanta as a group treasurer, because that was a skill which I had not dealt with at all in the past. While I had kind of done the treasury roles in other organizations, but the exposure and the scale at which I operated when I joined Vedanta as a group treasurer was one of the memorable moments.
Fantastic.
So I think at least Rashmi did something in and around her core expertise.
Yes.
In between, I took up a responsibility of finance transformation. Okay, it's like a finance guy, you're asking to do something around literature.
Yes.
And when it was around automation and finance transformation, where you need to really segregate the rule based, the judgment based, and you need to interact a lot with the IT guys.
Yes.
And I was technology wise, I was almost an illiterate those days. So I find that, okay, initial days I found life is really difficult going to be. I think that's one of the memories which I carry.
Today's your most
And
memorable
there is a
moment.
cliche that all finance leaders have to be finance transformation champions.
Clearly now, yes. I think so.
She is now.
What is your favorite activity when you're not working?
I run.
Yes, as we know.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, great. Great.
I'm a lazy guy, so I do sometimes painting.
Nice. Wonderful. We have an artist here. If you were to write a book, what would it be about?
If I were to write a book, and this is something which a lot of my friends have suggested to me, I should write a book on my learnings as a runner, in terms of how it impacts and changes you as a person.
Wow.
And also helps you professionally.
Wow, wonderful.
I've written a lot of blogs, I've written a lot of articles around it, but yeah,
There's a book in the making. Sounds like it.
maybe a few years down the line, yes.
You wonderful.
That's good to know. I think similar, somewhere if you'll see, one of the areas of interest for me is that when I see through the behavioral patterns of people, when the same person, when you put under a bit stress or a different scenario, situation, how the behavior and the judgment changes. And I really see those patterns very clearly.
Yes.
So
yes.
maybe in that space I'll write.
Okay. Interesting. How do you de-stress?
I run.
Would you run? Okay.
No, but I do. I also listen to music. I think that's the one other way. If I'm not running, then the other way
Or
is,
hand in hand sometimes.
or maybe sometimes they go together. Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
When she runs to de-stress, I walk.
Okay.
And I actually like spending some time with my son and wife. So that's where we just go for a long drive.
Wonderful. So what is the family to you?
Family is everything. It's everything. Yes. Right there in the list of priority number one.
Fantastic.
And I feel like family is somebody who is the backbone of you.
Yes.
You don't maintain any facade around you when you are in a family atmosphere. And I feel two places where I feel similar thing is that when you are working with your team, your own team, and your family at home. So both the places, the feeling is more or less similar.
Oh, fantastic. All right, and finally, one reason why you love finance.
For me, it was an acquired love. I'm an engineer, and it's only when I landed up at my MBA institute and picked up electives in finance is when I realized that it's something that I just love doing. And so it was a late love that bloomed with finance, but I like the fact that it's a lot more objective. There is something that's there in those numbers, and I tell people and I tell my team the same thing day in and day out. You have to look beyond the numbers. You have to look for the story behind the numbers. So it's on a plain piece of paper, you've just got these numbers out there, but there is just so much behind those numbers. And I like the fact that as a finance person, you're able to, or you're required to, and to get that story out.
Fantastic. Dave?
So I always wanted to be a doctor in the beginning of my career. Yeah. So, but my eagerness to learn around that somewhere I think gets satisfied when I'm in finance. Being at the hem of the affairs of the organization, you get to see what an HR does, what a procurement does, what a manufacturing, the operation teams does. So what the sales guy is doing. So you get a lot of things which converges on your table. So that's why I love finance.
Fantastic. Wow, Rashmi, Dev, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today and understanding who you are both in the boardroom and outside of the boardroom. Thank you for that. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, on that note, that's all we have for you on ET Studios CFO Blueprint in association with ET CFO. For more such in-depth conversations with India's leading CFOs, do stay tuned. Until next time, many thanks for watching.